Everybody hear me okay? Awesome. Well, such a hyper honor to be able to come and speak before such a distinguished group as the American Cetacean Society. And yeah, you guys are storied in all the incredible work that you've done. And when Dareth reached out to me, I said, only if in person. So hyper wonderful and super exciting, this project using the sounds that transmit through the atmosphere to gain insight into these animals. And we're here to learn from you. Look forward to an open discussions, things you've heard, and some of our most important data sets are now coming from citizen scientists just using their iPhones and going to the beach. And so big shout out to them and a big shout out to citizen scientists everywhere that are reinventing research. I'd love to acknowledge National Marine Fisheries Service, NOAA. They train us for our disentanglement teams. They give us excellent feedback on our permits, and NOAA stands behind us every step of the way. They were also the lead entities in the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and they're fighting the good fight. So heart goes out to the agency. And it's a blast to come down here and interact with the American Cetacean Society folks and maybe get out on the water at some point. And it's just really great to learn more about all the work the society has done in terms of early work with the policy advocacy and the IWC moratorium, all their support for different researchers. And I thank you very much for the assistance that was given to our project this last summer through ACS Puget Sound. And it's been fabulous having you're having my back and helping us raise funds for the project. And I look forward to reflecting with you insofar as one of the longest running shore-based activities in terms of your gray whale count, animals moving up and down the coast. And I think it's a really good trend of more and more work going on from shore-based stations all over. And that's what we've been exploring up in Southeast Alaska after decades of boat-based work. We're spending time on shore stations, listening to the animals, deploying hydrophones, microphones, and other sensors. So thank you for showing us the way. I would like to shout out to two of my core colleagues, Clark Snodgrass, who's right here. Thank you, Clark. Clark is our chief photo ID expert and has helped Ted Cheeseman pioneer a couple of basic techniques. And he was in on some of the early data sets that help define the algorithms. So great to have him on the team. And of course, Joseph, who's been a long-term member of ACS and the current president of the Puget Sound chapter. And we've had Joe up on our field site for the last 2 years. And in addition to decades of helping us design our studies through the provisioning of high quality hydrophones and transducers and various anchored arrays. Now we've got Joe now that he is moved on from cetacean research technologies. And so, yeah, big shout out to Mr. Olson. And a big shout out to the whalers who for centuries have been aware that whales make some pretty remarkable sounds that transmit through the atmosphere. I would just like to celebrate some of their observations. This is Beale from what, 1830 something, and noting that from the masthead, this was how they were under sail, right? And so there was silence, and such a big part of understanding aerial signals is just put the technology away. Turn off the combustion engines, turn off the generators, unplug, turn off the inverter so you don't have that 60 hertz hum, and just listen to the ocean. It's really amazing what rolls in. And Captain Hall in the 1860s likened the spout to the firing of an old-fashioned flintlock. Davis in the late 1800s noted that some of these animals can be noisy as the exhaust pipe of a 1,000 horsepower steam engine. And I love Bedard's work from the Book of Whales. And he noted that in terms of shore-based work, some of the Basque whalers actually built towers along the shorelines that they would, or climb up on cliff for the whale swimming by. And darn, it was effective that contributed to the extinction of the Atlantic gray whale. Minor detail, but the point being is that there's a ton of ways, if you're just shore-based, for these animals to enter into your lives. And even in modern research, Bruno's and his team's work looking at noticed that these spouts are really loud and basically explosive sounds that come from these animals. And also did another big shout out to citizen scientists and most of the people who have been coming to us through our calls for additional information. They're not motorboaters. They're not on cruise ships. They're villagers. They're kayakers, whoever's sailors, the non-motorized people, hot tubbers on the beach. They're the ones who are providing most of this information because they just don't have a lot of human noise that can match sound. And they have incredible stories about their, these night sounds that come in. Collectively, they call them night sounds. So there's a ton of information out there about these aerial sounds that is held within small communities. They have their own names for them. It's a pre-scientific level. And that's of interest as to, why information make it up into the scientific literature. But, I'm talking about their dogs hiding under the bed in the night sound and the trumpets that the whales give, people not knowing what they were at first, thinking there was a vessel in distress and mounting a rescue to go out there. And even reports of these signals being picked up vibrating through the earth, which is pretty cool. And so now we're thinking about even geosensors on this project. So a lot of exciting stuff. Of course, we're really interested ultimately in the conservation applications of this work. Would it be possible to contribute to the detection, the presence and absence of these whales by using these aerial sounds? And we have lots of things: observer networks, shore-based stations, certainly aerial surveys, passive acoustic monitoring with hydrophone arrays, but using aerial microphones as another way, depending on environmental conditions, to help inform ocean users, such as large vessels. Obviously, there's some highly evolved programs here. We're just thinking, would this be another tool that can contribute to the abundance and distribution of whales? As a responder up with the Alaska Response Network, human safety is paramount. And being able to read these animals a little better in order to know when we can safely approach them, that's huge. And it's real typical working with Ed. If an animal is showing any disturbance or unruly behavior, during a disentanglement operation, they often go through a variety of transitions of their temperament. And so being able to use the breath, which is so basic to mammals, right? Even more than their underwater vocalizations, their breath can tell us a lot. And so particularly during situations where the animal, this was an entanglement a few years ago up at the mouth of Glacier Bay in Gustavus, and we were able to successfully intervene with this animal and get almost all the gear released. And then very happily, about a year later, we got the first photos of the animal in the wild and exhibiting healthy, normal behavior. So these interventions can be really successful. But being able to read these animals, particularly in contexts where the animal is prevented from exhibiting their temperament because they're hog-tied or they're anchored. And so just being into the breath is really important. And there's some certain breath characteristics that we've been able to identify as being this animal, even though it may not be moving, it may seem like it's amenable to approach, but if you hear this respiration, it suggests the animal is severely emotionally dysregulated, which is understandable during disentanglement. It's time to give it a little space and stand down until the animal calms down. And of course, that allows us, getting approached close to these animals, to go to work with the incredible selection of tools that NOAA has provided with us, and innumerable training to stay on top of it. And so we're very grateful, and so are the whales. Also using the aerial sounds to understand their interior states, in addition to their basic temperament, by listening to the aerial signals in association with the hydrophone, by being able to identify the temperament of the animals. It also helps us understand the context and meaning of their underwater sounds, right? So just ways to pair. So we talked a little bit about how we pair both the aerial acoustics and the underwater sounds to understand these animals. And that includes not only the emotional valence, meaning are they happy? Are they aggressive? Are they calm? Are they curious? But also the intensity of these emotions can be, we're thinking, can be read fairly well from their aerial sounds. So why do baleen whales have such incredibly emphatic sounds? So first of all, they're gigantic, obviously some of the largest critters that ever lived, but baleen whales, particularly the rorquals, the blues, fins, Brutus whales, that group, minke whales, but also the humpback whale, they can be very assertive, fast-moving raptorial predators, gulp-feeding predators, and chasing various prey items. They also can dive deeply, have long downtimes for pursuing the prey. So they obviously start to build up a huge oxygen debt. Oftentimes the animals would like to pretty much spend all their time underwater, safer down there. Oftentimes there's more food resources there, but they do come back up to the surface to breathe. And that's oftentimes when the animals may be more susceptible to predators or disturbance. And so being able to stay down is good. And so they have evolved for very rapid transfer of air at the surface. Also, they're oftentimes feeding on these fast, vigilant, schooling prey, such as herring, sand lance, capelin, a variety of other species. Even the krills, the Antarctic krill, can be fairly evasive. And so you're going to burn up some calories chasing these prey organisms. And of course, every time they feed, it's like they open this big drag chute and substantially slow down their forward momentum. And so that means they have to get a couple of tail strokes to get back up to speed. It's all burning energy, which requires oxygen, and oxygen debt has occurred, which must be repaid at the surface. So when they get up to the surface, you see this incredible splash guard. This is looking at the business end of a humpback whale directly towards it. You see the sensory nodules, but you can see the blowhole is elevated up and almost telescopes up. The whale would like to get as little of its body out of the water every time it breathes because there's more friction at the surface because of the boundary layers. So when they come up, there's this intensive exchange, particularly exhale, that for this rapid exchange, and it's heard from the whalers. These sounds can be very loud and travel atmosphere for considerable distance. And to be sure, there has been a ton of work that utilizes the spouts for important information, as the American Cetacean Society does for one of the longest running shore-based observations of gray whales moving up on the coast. I'm sure acoustically and visually, the spouts are probably extremely important, particularly under certain lighting conditions. And so there's been tons of other research that has gone into looking at the respiratory behavior, figuring out developmental biology and development of myoglobin in baleen whale calves. Apparently a couple of calves were separated from their mothers, and SeaWorld brought them in to a managed environment and collected some amazing data on these animals while they lasted a few months to a year. Also, lots of work out looking at the respiratory variability of these animals and how that figures into intergenetics, seawater flux back into the blowhole. So to be sure, there is a huge literature base that looks at respiratory behavior, but it's primarily for tracking, positioning, diving, oxygen consumption, metabolics, and using respiration, changes in respiration in association with human disturbance. But what's less well studied are actually looking at the individual spouts for their spectral qualities, particularly emotional content, how we might gain insight into the animal's temperament, what is the diversity of sounds, and importantly, how do these aerial sounds link to underwater catalogs? Because humpbacks obviously are incredibly famous for their diversity of social sounds, songs, the Alaskan feeding calls for herding herring, May-gap clips, when they're targeting sand lance on the East Coast. So the Jim Darling's low frequency sounds. So a lot of different variation of acoustics come out of these animals underwater. And rightfully so, that's where a lot of the research has been focused. For For a part of this aerial signals project, we just want to do a thorough inventory of all the sounds, aerial sounds that have been noted both in the whaling literature and the scientific literature. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about our project going on with a Five Finger Lighthouse in Southeast Alaska. Just take a quick peek at our sounds catalogs and listen to some new sounds. So we'll get along and start to listen to some of these amazing sounds. So in terms of scientific legacy sounds, there's two papers, 1967 Watkins, and he was the first to just say, in a more systematic manner after the whalers, just say, hey, there's something going on here. And he noted that the whales have these, humpback whales have this normal, but as they get more excited, they get this kind of wheezy quality. And the wheeze blows are remarkably variable, and in some ways, that is where potentially a lot of information can be encoded because they're in no way stereotypical and have lots of different variations associated with them. Also up in our study area, Thompson et al. In the mid-80s, 1980s, did a great project where they both recorded underwater sounds, but also made some notes of their aerial acoustics, and they were the first to hear this loud skronk, this loud trumpeting sound that you can hear across the water. It sounds like a ship's whistle. And they also recorded the wheezed blows, which they call shrieks. And they did a lot of work of just documenting how loud these sounds actually are. And quotes from both the scientific and the whaling literature, when a whale changes its respiration from the normal blow to these more emphatic sounds, these are the words that they use to characterize the animals: excitement, purposefulness, socially significant, whales getting together and joining, frightness, and they're all loud. So again, a really potentially important way to gain insight from these animals. But they all recognize that once an animal gets emotionally dysregulated, that's when the really interesting sounds are produced. So tonight, we'll talk about the legacy sounds. We want to talk a little bit about which of these sounds acoustically coupled to the water. Very exciting, the mechanism of production. There's actually a structure in the blowhole of Mistaceae whales that no other animal has that we think are producing some of these crazy sounds. So it's kind of really exciting. And in that situation, we can't be expected to fully understand their meaning, right? Because they're coming from structures and being projected in ways that we don't fully understand yet. That's why we welcome any and all observations. And we'll reflect on the context, function, and meaning, and also the conservation value. And of course, another thing is just developing sensors, working with Joel Olson and other technicians trying to come up, what is the best way to, we just basically want to test and see what is the conservation efficacy of putting up aerial microphone arrays. So far, we've just been using single sensors that are linked to the hydrophone and a Zoom recorder, but we'd like to set up a bit of an array so we can get some appreciation of how far these sounds are transmitting through the atmosphere. And of course, we have a big debt and are super appreciative of the Five Finger Lighthouse Society. This organization has done a fantastic job. They inherited this facility about 6 years ago from the Juneau Lighthouse Society. And since that time, they've done a full refit of the facility. It's hyper comfortable. It's a great place to work. And it has this fantastic tower right in the middle of one of the largest aggregation of humpback whales anywhere in the North Pacific. So we're right here in Eastern Frederick Sound at the lighthouse. In the mornings, it seems like the whales kind of come and move on shore for feeding. So it's a great time for getting photo IDs for Clark to analyze. The lighthouse is great. Depending where you're on the island, you got 360 degrees view. And what's cool is that when you work from shore on a facility like this, you stay out with the whales 24/7, right? You're not going back in. A lot of the boats just around nightfall, they pick up when they have to run back to these anchorages to get off the water. Even though it's very calm here, you are in Alaska and the winds and waves can pick up anytime. So everybody goes into interior basins and they're not out in these large aggregations where we're working, which is fantastic having that capabilities. We're also being a part of the sound where we're away from the main cruise ship lanes, and unfortunately the fishing industry is gradually going down in its ubiquity, and so there's just more quiet sounds out there. The Great Lighthouse has, everything you need, Starlinks. We're about 40 miles from the nearest settlements, Petersburg or Cake, so there is ability for reprovision. So fantastic resource. There are 3 or 4 different workshops at the lighthouse. So whatever we break, I'm pretty good at breaking things, so they're right there to help out. And the whales are right there. It's really cool. The island has 3 pairs of breeding, last year, 3 pairs of breeding black oyster catchers. There's dozens of pigeon guillemots. There's a pair of bald eagles that nest on the island. It's only a 2-acre island, right? I love it because it's small enough to hear the dinner bell, but big enough to avoid work parties if I want to go off and crunch some data. So love the place. This is in 2025. It just shows you some of the aggregations of whales that can be seen from the lighthouse. These amazing aggregations. There appears to be bathymetric features that interrupt the large horizons of krill that drift back and forth in Frederick Sound. Frederick Sound is the largest interior sea on the inside passage. So that does not have an open connection to the ocean. And so we're a couple of mountain ranges back, so we get a lot of calm weather in summer. And it's this great solar-powered krill factory. And so the whales come. And you can see this is some of the work that Happy Whale data that Clark has worked up. And you can see the arrows pointing to the lighthouse. And these are the Happy Whale sightings. And you can see Eastern Frederick Sound has it going on. A vessel, Dennis Rogers on one of their boats with Adam Pack, they, in one day in Eastern Frederick Sound, they identified nearly 400 unique humpback whales. So pretty exciting place to do the work. And here you can see again, this really big aggregation of animals, pretty exciting. And so our observation methods are pretty standard: zoom recorders, shotgun mics, the 4-channel zoom recorders. We can bring in both underwater and above air sound, so they're integrated, so we can do the sound pressure level comparisons. Hydrophones, they're really easy to deploy because the several parts of the island, the water drops off very steeply. We basically use fishing poles, and we can just run the hydrophones in, drop them down with a lead going back up to a central control site at the lighthouse. And this is Rachel Mead, another one of our researchers. Rachel recently graduated from Western Washington University, and she's looking to pursue this work in a master's degree. We don't need to do any hardcore modification of the land area. The island has really rough topography, so you can just jam these fishing poles into the rocks. So it's pretty handy. And then 24/7, they're sitting out there. And it's really great to do passive work because we're not putting any additional acoustic energy into the water. As you can see, sometimes it can get super calm. You can just these fantastic recordings. There's a lot of snapping shrimp and epibenthic stuff, but they are typically at frequencies outside of the primary vocal domain, the peak frequency of the humpback whale vocalization. So that's not so much a problem. And it's got a great helipad that do a lot of our work from, a big flat area for the work. And using theodolites, we can position the whales, and great place for getting photo IDs. It's also a site we can do playbacks from. It's deep enough. So here's Joe working with some of the playback equipment, and the speakers can just be deployed right from the island in the steeper areas. So it's like being on a boat, right? And it's cool because when the tides come, the spring tides, the intensive tides come cruising by, so you feel like you're on a boat with the water. You can get, water 2.5, 3 knots sometimes ripping by the lighthouse. So it's pretty exciting. And the lighthouse is also great for sleeps up to, can take parties of up to 8, maybe 9 individuals. And it's a great place for conducting the analysis. Starlink, full galley, it's really wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about some of these aerial sounds. So this is our sound catalog. The white sounds represent signals that were already recognized in the literature, and the yellow ones are ones that we've subsequently identified and are we deem these to be undescribed sounds. But there's your basic spout. Sometimes they start to purse the blowholes. There are certain sounds they make on the inhale. And there's also subsurface exhalations that the animal can make when those bubbles come up to the surface, those sounds can actually transmit if you're nearby to listen to. So here is our standard this is 95% of the acoustic energy that goes into the atmosphere from a humpback whale. This is what you're going to hear. Just a really nice traveling, feeding, low intensity low intensity socializing. That's what you get. And when the animals start to get even more relaxed, there's this really nice kind of flutter, and you can hear the inhale too. It's really sweet. That long, that indicates a very relaxed animal. So when you start to get these harsher characteristics, you can see that in the spectrogram. Just a quick look at these like you're reading music. You've got, this is your frequency, low, high, and then this is your time domain. So just like reading sheet music, very common in bird studies. And you start to notice this much more. So this animal's starting to get a little bit excited. And here's another one. Then they give a whole variety of these wheezy sounds, but very short, abbreviated ones that we're calling a pew. That little bit, that right there at the end. So when you start to get the burry tones, you know these animals are getting into an elevated emotive state. And so when the respiration, the exhalation starts to get segmented into different parts, this is the sign of an animal at probably a more extreme emotional dysregulation. Hear that 3 parts? And I remember the first time I heard this, I was hiking above our field station in Warm Springs Bay. I was, maybe about 1,000 feet up, and I heard these sounds coming from down right in the harbor. And I go sprinting down there. It's like, this whale does not sound normal. And by the time I got down there, the whale was long gone. But all the villagers and boaters were saying, there was a whale stuck between the boats and the dock. There'd been a lot of marine sediment from glaciation, and so visibility was very poor. The whale got stuck and it was under duress, and there was that 3-parted call. And so subsequent to that, it has been very useful to be vigilant of that when we are engaging in our disentanglement activities. And here is a whale. This is what we call the chuff. This was sent to us by some citizen scientists in the Salish Sea, and they claim that this whale came up with its blowhole and mimic the sound of a vernalift wet exhaust. But sometimes they kind of go tock, 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 as the water is draining out. There's sort of a percussive popping sound. You can hear that, and then what appears to be, they claim, the whale mirroring those sounds to the enthralled whale.
What is he saying to you guys?
So, pretty cool. And what's really remarkable about this is that the same structure in the blowhole of the humpback whale, the anatomical fat plugs, the same fatty tissues that are associated with odontocyte vocalization. Remember, they talk through their nares. Okay.
What is he?
Enough of that. Thank you. So it's pretty exciting to see. We put a lot of emphasis on the odontocyte sound production, but there's also similar utilization, evolutionary utilization of these fat bodies for sounds. So here's a sound. We call this a bubble boil. It's kind of quiet. You'll have to listen very carefully. But this is a whale exhaling underwater, and you can kind of hear this sort of hydrodynamic sound. Well, that was a common murr. And let's try that again. What you can hear in this recording, you hear kind of a ooh. That what we believe is it's called a howl inhale. So this is where the inhalation part of this you can make that out with certain inhalation sounds. And here's what we're calling the pizzle. This is when a whale has a pursed blowhole underwater. That underwater exhalation. So these are very near field, within probably a few hundred meters, you can detect these sounds. But again, whales that exhale before they hit the surface, usually there's something going on. There's some social thing or vessel disturbance, and good to be attentive to. Now, these are the really fun ones. These are the very loud aerial trumpets that Thompson et al. In 1986 first documented. And so people are like, what was that, right? Oftentimes people associate it with some sort of horn or distress call on a vessel. And this is really cool. These ones were sent to us by a citizen scientist in Petersburg. And this is what at night in the rain. Beautiful. And we think this might have been the same animal. And depending on their mood, they can really change the structure of these aerial sounds. Crazy metallic sounds, beautiful. So you can start to see there's a lot of different sounds that come out of these animals. As noticed by Thompson et al. In 1986, what they said was these classic relaxed blows, those barely acoustically couple to the water. But as soon as the whales start to get excited, they're louder, and these sounds are coming further down within the blowhole cavity, and they can transmit to the water column very well. And so what's cool is that, so there's with these certain sounds, what you're hearing in the whale is also being transmitted underwater. And this one, I seem to recall, I recorded at, the pod was a good distance away, and you can hear the trumpet sound underwater. So by knowing which sounds acoustically couple, you as an observer on the beach can appreciate for sounds that are being transmitted underwater. Sounds like a 1952 Chevy, doesn't it? So here's another, this was in the, just before midnight. It was pitch black out. And we had always thought that the mainland was sufficiently far enough away that there was nothing that the whales could produce aerially that we could sense by echoing off the neighboring mountains. And we were pleasantly surprised to learn elsewhere there's the initial call, initial vocal trumpet. Sorry about my iPhone, but listen for these echoes. That was really cool. And these subtle echoes went on for almost 30 seconds. And we're just like, what is possibly out there? What kind of geographic features are these whales bouncing these sounds off of? And the nearest range of mountains is Mount Fanshawe. And this is quite a ways to the southeast of the island. And I'll show you a map and a blue dot. This is where this photograph was taken. So the lighthouse is up here. And look at all these concave mountains that could potentially bounce sound back. And so because we were outside when the sound happened, we could point directly at the direction that it came from. So we had a heading on the animal. And by studying the echo acoustics and their timing, we were actually able, we believed we could pinpoint the position of that whale within, say, a few hundred meters. And so we think the animal was approximately 10 kilometers from us when it made this sound. And you start to look at this very first bounce, this very first echo. And the summit was up to 15 kilometers away. And the very first echo we noted there was this really big face, which would have been probably where the first sound was being bounced off. You look at the sound speed in air, 343 meters a second. And in 6 seconds, it can travel 2 kilometers. And the primary reflector then we estimated was just a little over 1 kilometer away. And so it had almost matched perfectly, aligned perfectly with the topographical features of the sound production. What's also really cool is that we think this long tail being produced came from the sound that was either bouncing off these more distant peaks, but also we see this as this very interesting, apparently a reverberant basin that the whales' trumpets got caught in there and bounced around back and forth and gradually leaked back to our position at the lighthouse. So pretty exciting to be able to picking up sound, some of these that after they bounce around a while for up to 18 kilometers. And so the possibility of using these sounds as another way to do presence and absence of these animals to help inform ocean users to be more vigilant of these animals seems like it's got some really distinct possibilities. But one of the sounds that we're most excited about is the thrum. This is one that doesn't appear in any catalogs, and as far as we can know, no one had made any reference to this. And it's this very low frequency sound. They appear like the trumpets to be quite far traveled through the atmosphere, and we hear them primarily at night. Of course, all the locals around there know about these sounds, the fishers, the villagers, and they collectively call these the night sounds. So they're really exciting to get a look at these. And what's crazy about it is they sound very similar to the low frequency rumbles of elephants that have been documented over the last 20 years about the ways that these elephants are potentially communicating over a kilometer or two out of sight with their sounds moving through the atmosphere and received or even through the earth. So kind of interesting comparison there, interesting analogy. And here's one. This was sent to us, Brian, from the Alaska Marine Exchange. He's standing on the beach just south of Juneau. So very interesting. You can see how low frequency this is down below 40 hertz. Remember, the limit of human hearing goes down to about 20 hertz. 20 to 20 is your typical 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz typical human range when we're infants. And so very commodiously, the whales are producing all this energy within the human hearing range, which is really cool. And we'll listen to some comparative elephant sounds that were provided from Kelly Bakos, who recorded these on a trip to Africa. Now, we're not making any claims that basically, we don't know what the function of the whale's thrums are, but we just think it is interesting. Anytime an animal is producing very low frequency sounds that appear to be packaged for moving through the atmosphere, you have to wonder if there is a function to these or whether they're just incidental, like creaking knees or a sneeze, and are just incidental sounds. Listen to a couple other thrums. Very low frequency. And I seem to recall in the past, pre-North Pacific marine heat wave that started in 2012, 2013, which greatly impacted the primary productivity of the Gulf of Alaska. I seem to recall when we had these really large aggregations in Frederick Sound, I just seem to recall at times thinking about this low frequency rumble that was almost continuous in the atmosphere where there were so many whales around. And so is there some sort of emergent property of these sounds, or do they have some broader social purpose, aggregation purpose? It remains an open question. And there's ways that, one of the ways we can distance how far away these thrums are, part of it is just when we see an aggregation of animals out there. These animals are intensely patchy across the surface of the ocean. here we have this large aggregation over towards the Brothers Island. Here's the lighthouse. And we also had one of our colleagues, Don and Bree Dury, were in their sailboat, and we were chatting on the cell phone at the time. It was like, wow, I just heard this incredible thrum coming over from towards Brothers Island, and it seemed quite distant to us. And then by the time it got to them, they said, yeah, we heard that too. And so there's really interesting ways that you can start to triangulate these sounds and get an appreciation for how far these thrums are traveling through the atmosphere. But just a quick review. Fundamental frequencies down around 35 to 40 hertz, 3 to 7 harmonic bands, with most of the energy concentrated in the even bands. And the whales appear to have their blowhole barely open, just a crack when they're making these. Based on my brother Paul as part of our research team, and we've been able to see that actually the blowhole seems to be mostly closed, just enough when they're making these sounds. It was very interesting if you start to look carefully at the pressure wave of these sounds. It appears like it's not just a single sound source, but maybe two, and you can see a very complicated waveform here, suggesting that it's not just a single pulse arriving at the hydrophone, but maybe multiple pulses. And there's various ways we can estimate the distance, not only by seeing where the animals are with our associated landforms out at sea, islands, navigation buoys, or if we're using a SIP tracking system, we can see how close animals are to vessels transiting by. So it's a good way, but also just the differential arrival time of these thrums, both underwater and through the air. I know I mentioned earlier that the thrums are very insulated from the water, but at close range, say within a half mile, we can detect the same sound both above and below the water, which is really cool. And then just the differential arrival time, we can again calculate how far these animals are away from us. And if you see here, this was this thrum that we noted from these animals out here, and you'll see a spout, and then you'll be able to hear, it's just a normal spout, but anytime, just like when you hear lightning, or you see lightning, then you have the thunder. Remember 1,000, 2, 1,000, you can estimate how far away these sounds are coming. Well, you can do the same thing if you have an animal. There's the thrum. There's the spout. When the spout arrives, you just do the basic math, and you can calculate exactly, or quite accurately, to probably within a few tens of meters, how far that animal is away from your position. Pretty cool. And yeah, so we're really excited about these thrums. We have, again, no idea what the function is of these things, but we're excited for next season to get a better look at these. But we have implicated a structure in the animal's blowhole that is potentially producing these sounds. This is a necropsy done by Dr. Joy Reidenberg of the Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York. She's done tons of work on vocal apparatus, but also the blowholes and sound generation. Here we see this is a very young, I think it's even a neonate humpback whale, peeling back the blowhole and taking a look at these very interesting paired structures in the blowhole. And these are what are called the anatomical fat plugs. And these are thought to be evolved to, when the whale dives, to prevent water incursion at depth. These fat plugs slide back into the nasal cavities. And as the whale goes deeper, this fat can just slide way down into the nasal cavities, perhaps almost towards the lungs. And it has a couple things. The deeper they go, it just seals tighter and tighter. You know, think of a water balloon that you've got, and it's just this long tendon, stringy tendon with this big blob of fat. That's what these are. And so, and what's crazy about it, these are evolved, these fat muscles are evolved from the same smile muscle fats, the dorsal bursa. All of our skeletal faces tend to have these little fat packages that help lubricate where bones come together. And if you've got, if you have knees going out, oftentimes it's the loss of that lubrication, which creates pain and difficulty walking. Well, these these fat bodies that were in these sinuses between the sutures in the face, those appear both in dolphins and mysticetes to have utilized those. Remember, evolution is really good at repurposing structures for different functions. That appears to be what's happened here. And so we have these amazing structures that are found in no other animal other than the mysticete, the baleen whales. And we think it's these things rattling around in there for some reason when under certain configurations, probably maybe 1 in 500 spouts, you'll get one of these very interesting low frequency rumbles. And it's really awesome to be able to be working with the whales when they're at the surface. Well, because basically you can see them, right? It's not like they're underwater. Some of these animals can stay underwater for 30 or 40 minutes when they're just sleeping or chilling out. So, but they're up at the surface, and admittedly, the behaviors that are going underwater may bear no resemblance to what's happening at the surface because they're coming up to breathe, right? And they're breaking off their social activities or they're hunting. But the point thing is, when they're using these sounds, we can see them. Not only can we see them, but we can see the blowhole where we believe the sound as emission is from. The fact that the sound is relatively insulated from the water suggests it should be occurring high in the animal and pretty much out of the water we can hear it. And what's great is that you don't need technology to hear this stuff. In fact, technology kind of gets in the way. Now, of course, we use it extensively when we're recording these animals to archive this information and do these spectrographic analyses. But these sounds are so powerful and within the human hearing range that just put that stuff away. And I love it because, again, it's the passive ocean users who are into this stuff and have the names for them and are sharing their data with us. It's really awesome. And not only that, we've had several reports now, people saying, I can feel these coming through the earth. Like some of the lighthouse keepers at Five Finger Islands, like I'll be in the very basement down in the rock room and I can feel these like, what was that? Did you hear that? And so it's really cool that these sounds are sufficiently powerful. They may be transmitting. So we're excited next summer to bring up some geosensors and see if we're also picking them up on the substrate. And again, thrums are really cool, super low frequency, very low frequency, nocturnal. So far, the longest transmission we picked up to the atmosphere is 11 kilometers. They appear to be evolved from fat plugs, and sky's the limit on what these whales are actually doing with these. And these are really important lessons for us in that these are sounds that have been exciting and enlivening the tympanic junction of humans for as long as we've been around the water, right? But yet they haven't been scientifically documented. And it just provides a lesson in how is it that we can miss these signals, right, and not document them. And this is also really important. I have an affiliate association with the SETI Institute. And of course, they're intensely interested in the notion about why after 60 years of intensive all sky and targeted searches for life in the universe, we so far completely flatlined, at least in terms of scientific evidentiary proofs. And so here we have these amazing animals making these very interesting sounds that are largely going under the radar. So it's just perhaps some of the lessons that why we're missing out and not making detections when there should be a signal there. We can maybe apply some of these rules, such as masking. Obviously, any type of human noise can interfere with them, particularly lower frequency noise. Are the signals being misidentified, or are they deemed not important, or we're just not out there to hear these sounds? So just to summarize, we talked about the legacy observations. We talked about our work at Five Finger Lighthouse, introduced you to the sound catalog, and we did a case study on some of these new sounds. And we're also excited what's next. We're excited about the 2026 field season that's coming up. That'll be our third season at the Lighthouse, specifically targeting these aerial sounds. We'd like to get more data on the air-water relationship, more analysis, get some of this stuff written up. And super important is the behavioral context so we can infer function and potential meaning to these signals. I would like to get Rachel into a graduate program and continue to engage citizen scientists to help them listen for these sounds and tell us the stories and names that they've made up for these amazing signals. Big shout out for our research team, Rachel and Joe, of course, Clark, my brother Paul, Lisa Walker, Donna Reed Dury, a couple of Juneau and Petersburg residents, Joseph Quitzlin, Jim Samard, and of course, the fabulous Joy Reidenberg. And a big shout out to the American Cetacean Society for inviting me here to speak and allowing us to gather for one of the first times. And so it's been a pleasure to meet you all. And a big shout out to the Five Finger Lighthouse Society for letting us come and invade their facility. Thank you so much.